Welcome, guys. Good morning. Welcome into the live this morning. Thank you all so much for coming. This is Trev from Trevessence, and today we are going to continue the reading of the book Twice in a Lifetime by Dorothy Garlock. Now, forgive me for keep on saying and writing Dorothy Garland. I mean, that word just flips off my tongue, but it's actually Dorothy Garlock. So, thank you so much, guys, for coming in. If you're new here, a very special welcome to you. If you are returning traveler, I want to say thank you for your continued support. Now, we are on to chapter 3 of this book. It is gearing up to be a good read. I hope it lives up to what we are seeing right now. And I'm anxious to see what happens to Tommy because Tommy seems like a wayward child, you know. Yesterday I talked about how difficult it can be for parents who have to raise their children alone because the loss of the other parent, by whatever reason, the other parent is missing out of the child's life. It can be very, very difficult. And the teenage years coupled with that can be unbelievably difficult for everybody involved. All right, so let us continue with chapter 3. Dave McCoy raced towards the turn, then eased off the accelerator, one hand down shifting gears while the other whipped the steering wheel to the left. Tapping on the brakes, he sent the car drifting, deftly holding it steady as dirt and rocks sprayed. The engine roared and the tires screamed as he strained against his seatbelt. Finally, he was through the curve, hurtling into another straightaway and stumping back down on the gas. Through it all, he never stopped smiling. The small track was just to the west of town. Drake wasn't even sure of the place's name, only that it was one of hundreds like it scattered across northern Missouri, and that it had a tavern where he had rustled up some action. The track had seen better days. Weeds filled the cracks in the pavement in front of the rickety grandstand. The paint on the outbuildings was faded and chipped. The rainwater had eroded part of the grade buttress one end, making it harder to navigate. Worse, the track had been laid out with the straightaways running east to west, meaning that drivers would be staring straight into the setting sun. Normally, these things would have bothered Drake, but not today. Today was easy money. Confident, Drake took a quick look into his rearview mirror. The other car was fading fast. The driver had entered the turn too high and was now struggling to stay on the road. He had to slow dramatically, falling farther behind with every passing second. So Drake took his foot off the gas. In the many years Drake had been taking money from drivers foolish enough to bet that they were better than him, he had learned a valuable lesson. Never whoop them too badly. Drake whizzed past the grandstand. His friend and mechanic, Amos Barstow, watched impassively, his arms folded in a nest. Beside him were 4 or 5 other men, friends of the driver Drake was currently leaving in the dust. He had only gotten a quick glimpse, but he could see that none of them looked happy. Most times Drake raced, it was like today. He was either on his own or had one other person along, while his opponent would be a loudmouth surrounded by friends, his pride on the line along with his money. Usually they drove fancy cars, new but without much substance, and looked at Drake's 4-year-old black Plymouth as outdated. They were braggarts who wouldn't know how to spell humility if you spotted them 6 letters. That often made them sore losers. If they were beaten so badly that they were embarrassed, there could be problems. Once in Arkansas, Drake had had a gun pulled on him. Now, Now, both older and wiser, he found it better to let his opponents lose with their dignity intact. Barreling headlong into the new turn, Drake made it seem as if he was struggling to hold the road, which was tricky. It couldn't be too obvious that he was shrinking the distance between the cars. By the time Drake was back on the opposite straightaway, the other driver was much closer. And I bet he's starting to think he just might win this thing. But he was dead wrong. The bet had been for 10 laps, so that meant there were only two to go. Drake would let the other car hang around, never drawing much closer, making for a good showing. But then, when it was time to cross the finish line, he would be first. Drake smiled again. No matter what his life was like off the racetrack, he had always found peace behind the wheel. Most people would be terrified by the deafening noise, the bumpy rides, and the ever present danger of crash. But Drake, he was filled with a sense of calm. The inside of a racing car felt like the place where he belonged, almost as if it was his home. Here, everything made sense. Suddenly, violently, Drake was jolted out of his thoughts when the other driver rammed his rear bumper. The force of the blow caused the steering wheel to fight him. The Plymouth, the Plymouth loose on the dirt track, trying to escape, but Drake held on, his hands a strangling vice, and fought it back under control. Now, when in the hell did you have to go and do that? He asked. He asked into the rearview mirror. The Rube wasn't going down without a fight. At the next turn, one of the last, he took the more dangerous route and tried to pass Drake's car on the left to the inside of the track at high speed, and with such a tight angle, his chances of success were slim. Still, the odds didn't appear to dissuade him any. You better watch what you're getting into, Drake warned. Having been in this position hundreds of times before, Drake refused to budge. He had seen less experienced drivers shrink in the face of impending contact, but if he wanted to win, he couldn't give way. Sure enough, seconds later, the Plymouth was once again battered. The other driver's bumper rubbed up against Drake's rear wheel. The car bucked hard, and the sound of grinding metal was deafening. He could only imagine the look on Amos's face. Risking a quick glance back, Drake saw a shower of sparks. Regardless, he hung steady, determined not to give an inch. You're not going to get me that easy. Roaring into the final curve as the grandstand and finish line came into sight, Drake cut the corner tighter than he normally would, shrinking the other driver's space further. Such a move left his competitor with few choices. He could either back off and concede victory to Drake, or he could push himself into an even more precarious situation, a dangerous one, a position that could easily end in a crash. Oh, Joe is here. Good morning, Joe. How are you doing, my love? So good to see you. How is your Wednesday morning going? It's hump day, and we are getting this out of the way, among other things, before, we got to do other things for the day. But I welcome you this morning, Joe. It's always a pleasure to see you, my love. Thank you so much for coming. We're going to try to knock off these two chapters in the next, I don't know, the next 30 minutes or so. But thank you so much, my love. Let us continue. Not knowing better, and with the pressure of his friends looking on, Drake knew exactly which choice the man would take. Danger and damn the consequences. With his accelerator pressed to the floor, the other driver plowed recklessly forward, once again brushing up against the Plymouth. Neither man would surrender an inch, determined not to be the loser, as they hurtled towards the rapidly approaching finish line. I know, drag great. Drag racers are crazy, you know. The win is more important than their safety sometimes. And it's sad that sometimes the latter gets compromised. Drake grinned as he held the shaking wheel. His heart pounded as he watched the car slowly spin closer to the invals along the track and worn in as much as a state of disrepair as the rest of the place. And it wasn't long before the other car smashed into one of them, then another, and then more. They exploded on contact, sending showers of splinters flying. One broken pole crushed the car's windshield. Eventually, the barrage became too much for the other driver, and he spun out of control, shout, shouting up a Overton, what's up? How are you doing? Good to see you, my brother. Good to see you. Eventually, the barrage became too much for the other driver, and he spun out of control, shooting up a cloud of dust before eventually coming to rest, pointed back the way he had come. How are you doing, my loves? Good to see y'all. Drake crossed the finish line first, the winner. He was laughing the whole way. I told you to be careful. Amos Barstow stormed past Drake and knelt beside the Plymouth, inspecting the damage. When his hand touched the deep dent in the rear panel, he winced. That's what I was doing, Drake insisted, raising his hands, palms out. But when the other guy gets it into his head to try to pass on the inside and there isn't room to do it, I'm gonna get hit. What was I supposed to do? Lose? Fixing this might cost us more than we won. Drake shrugged. Take it up with the other guy if he ever manages to get off the track, though I doubt he'd be in the mood to talk. Thank you so much, my love. I sincerely appreciate you every time. The other car looked to have stalled. The driver was under the hood, swearing so loudly they could hear him at the grandstand. If you'd done what I told you to do, then that bum would have been without half a tap. Amos grumbled, wiping sweat from his brow with a handkerchief. What are you talking about? I won the race. The mechanic frowned. I seen you took your foot off the gas. All because you were worried about trying to make that chump look good. Giving the dented bumper a rap with his knuckles, he added, and this is what it got us? Drake chewed the inside of his lips. Amos knew him as well as anyone. Hell, he knew him better. But they had met 8 years earlier, just after the war, when Drake got back behind the wheel. Amos had bounced around tracks for decades, tinkering with engines and making them run harder and faster than they'd ever gone before. Now closer to 60 than 50, almost 15 years older than Drake, Amos was thin, with sandy blonde hair that looked white in the sun. Sweat slicked his forehead, wetting his shirt against his skin. Grease stained his fingers and filled the deep wrinkles that greased his hands, a testament to his work and passion. Every one of these dents is 'cause you were taking risk. You ain't got no reason chasing. Amos continued. What's wrong with us embarrassing that boy, winning some money, and then hightailing it out of town? What would be the fun in that? Fun, the mechanic echoed dismissively. While Drake found happiness behind the wheel of the race car, caked, caked in choking dust or dripping with sweat as he whipped around the track or down a lonely road, walking a dangerous fine line, Amos's love for cars was different. To Amos, automobiles were puzzles in need of solving. Under the hood, with a tool in his hand and a bright light of a work bulb illuminating the guts of an engine, was where he found happiness. If there was a problem, he fixed it, replacing broken parts and busted hoses, adding grease, water, or oil. When there wasn't an issue, he created one, a challenge to drive faster, to push himself and the car to greater heights. Drake was the beneficiary, putting Amos's handiwork up against drivers in Illinois and Mississippi, Kansas and Oklahoma, Arkansas and Missouri. Together, they managed to eke out a living running sanctioned races around tracks, winning their share of trophies and prize money, and then supplementing their income by running against braggarts who thought their skills would match up. After all the years they had spent together, the bond between the two men was strong, greater than friendship. Drake sometimes felt as if Mosey was the father he wished he had had. Still, that closeness didn't mean the mechanic wasn't testy whenever Drake brought back a damaged car. It's got to be hell to knock out these dents, Amos grumbled. What are you complaining about? Would you rather I get hit up front? At least the engine isn't busted up, is it? I'd rather you didn't get hit at all. As he and Moses bickered, Drake kept an eye on the other driver's friends. They appeared uncomfortable, but out that the car they had backed let's do that again. They appeared uncomfortable, put out that the car had backed they had backed had come in. We're gonna skip over all of that. And we're gonna do that again. What are you complaining about? Would you rather I hit you up front? At least the engine isn't busted up, is it? I'd rather you'd never got hit at all. As he and Moses bickered, Drake kept an eye on the other driver's friends. They appeared uncomfortable, put out that the they had backed had come up short. They kept looking back and forth between Drake and their best companion, still swearing a blue str- still swearing a blue streak out on the track. Sometimes these words they put together in my mind don't go together, but my tongue got to say it, and I'm like, what? What did they just say? But anywho, let's continue. It was telling that not a one of them. But guys, you have to understand, this is the language from the 1950s. And we don't talk like that today. So so it baffles me when I have to read the stuff. That's from then, even with the language and the words that they put into the sentences that in today's language is like misplaced. But anywho, we will continue. I see over 50 and Fantabulous is here. How are you doing? Just stopping in to I love you, my sister. Thank you so much. I appreciate you. Which one's holding the money? Drake asked. The mousy looking one in the checkered shirt. The mechanic answered, not even looking up from the damaged car. Before the race had begun, they had agreed to have one of the men hold the $40 wagered. Now that he had won, Drake wanted his earnings. I'll be right back. You best be more careful than you were racing, Amos said. Flashing a good-natured smile, Drake walked over to the men. Right away it was obvious which one held the money. He was a runt of a man, short, all bone in his shoulders and elbows. His eyes were narrow and wild, looking everywhere but at Drake. Just as Amos had said, he looked like a rodent. So, fellas, Drake began, now that the race is over, I reckon it's time for me to collect my winnings. Well, the mousy man mumbled. I wouldn't give you nothing, Garrett. One of his companions suggested. Neither of the other men was much more remarkable than the money holder, disheveled in appearance and dress, clearly lackeys, not leaders. Just wait till Caleb gets here, the other said. Listen here, Garrett, Drake insisted, raising his voice enough to grab the man's full attention. You watched the race, didn't you? Garrett nodded dumbly. So you saw me cross the finish line first, right? Another nod. Then there shouldn't be any problem giving me the money. I was the winner after all. Drake had seen enough situations like this one, to know that the sooner he got his money and took off, the better for everybody. Once men like this started thinking, bad things happened. But a sudden honk meant that it was too late. Drake turned to see the other driver finally leaving the track. He braked his dented car to a sudden stop, kicking up a cloud of dust. The driver's side door flew open and Caleb got out. The man was the man was red with fury, his face covered in sweat, his clothes and hands filthy from working beneath the hood. Don't give that son of a bitch a dime, he shouted. As Caleb stalked towards them, Drake noticed that each of the man's friends took a small step back, all of them cowed in his presence. Drake moved closer. The deal was winner takes all, he explained, once again trying on his easy smile. The way I see it, that would be me. I didn't lose, the other man growled. Caleb reached Drake and stopped, staring at him with barely restrained rage. Almost 20 years younger, he was half a head taller, his arms thick with muscle, his body tense with energy of youth. There was little doubt in Drake's mind that the man was used to getting his way, bullying those around him into doing his bidding. To be shown up so badly had wounded far more than his wallet. I guess his ego was wounded too. I guess. To the younger man, Drake figured he looked like just another obstacle to be bowled over. At 42, he wasn't physically imposing, but he carried himself well. Trimmed, he still had plenty of strength. His dark hair was cut short and flecked with silver across the temples. There were a few lines on his face, but whenever he smiled, they vanished. It was only in his eyes, autumn brown touched with green, crinkled with the with a flock's worth of crow's feet, that he saw his true age. Some mornings he had trouble recognizing himself in the mirror, as if a stranger was looking back at him in the glass. But though he was no longer a young buck, Drake McCoy wasn't easily intimidated. Hey guys, what's up? Everybody doing? Let me continue. Especially when it came to racing, Drake chuckled. Must have been my imagination then, crossing the finish line while you were pointed in the wrong direction. Hmm, I didn't lose fair, Caleb explained. You cheated me. How do you figure? You know I was trying to pass you, he argued, spittle flying from his mouth. So you smashed into my car to keep me from winning. Drake shook his head. This was hardly the first time he had had to listen to a driver make baseless accusations to cover up his shortcomings. Caleb's Chrysler was first rate, not long off the assembly line, cherry red with white rim, a far prettier sight than the Plymouth. But Drake knew that it was what was under the hood, as well as who was behind the wheels, that really mattered. Caleb had come up short, and since it would have been hard to put the blame on himself or his car, he pointed his finger at Drake. What else to do? You gotta find somebody to blame. You hit me first. Bullshit, the other man spat. Come on now, Drake replied, trying to calm things down before they got out of hand. Losing is never easy, but Caleb interrupted by pushing his chest hard, forcing Drake's back to back up a step. You calling me a liar? The bully demanded. All I'm saying is that another shove came, but this time Drake held his ground, which only served to infuriate Caleb some more. Glancing over, Drake saw that Moses, I keep calling Amos Moses, but it's really Amos, guys. So when you hear me say Moses, it's really Amos. Glancing over, Drake saw that Amos had stood up from the rear of their car, a wrench in his hand. If it came to it, the mechanic would be there to back him up. He also noticed that Caleb's buddies had all moved closer, as if they could sense what was coming, drawn to it like moths to a flame. Cheaters don't deserve no money, Caleb announced as his hand tightened into a fist and the sneer worsened his already rough features. He was nearly trembling with anger. The only thing you got coming is a good ass beating. Drake could have laughed. What sort of fool announced what he was going to do before he even threw the first punch? He ducked nimbly, Caleb's fist sailing harmlessly over his head. If it had landed, there was little doubt that he would have been knocked cold. Unfortunately for Caleb, the bigger man was now completely exposed. Quick as a flash, Drake pivoted on his front foot. His front foot. That's funny. Cortian, what's up? How you doing, my love? Good to see you. Drake pivoted on his front foot and drove his fist as hard as he could into his opponent's stomach. Caleb collapsed in a heap, rolling over onto his side, holding his midsection as he gasped for air. Oh my God, that was some kind of fight. The fight was over before it had really begun. Drake walked over to where Garrett and the other men stood in stunned disbelief. While, while before they had been gaining confidence with every loud, threatening word Caleb uttered, now all their faith had vanished. They resembled mutts cowering in the face of a new alpha dog in the yard. My money, Drake said, holding out his hand. Quick as a flash, Garrett dug into his pocket and pulled out the crumpled wad of bills that he then jammed into Drake's hand. Much obliged, Drake said with a wink. He got into the Plymouth. Amos was already in the passenger seat and turned the key in the ignition. All the while, he watched the men in the rearview mirror. Caleb tried to get to his feet, but failed, crashing back down into the dirt, while everyone else stood around, impotent. Nothing with you is easy, Amos said. Always got to be a show. Drake laughed. And you had the best seat in the house, didn't you? With that, they drove off towards the next forgettable town and the next opponent, willing to bet he was faster. Welcome, guys. Thank you all so much for coming. I should have started the reading earlier. But boy, guys, sleep just got me. Exhaustion just got me. Yesterday I did a whole lot. And I ran 24 hours without sleep. And so I decided I was going to take just a little nap around 6:30. Just a little nap because I was going to wake up, by 8:39. And that little nap took me into 4 o'clock this morning. Oh my God, you can't fight the body. And then when you're getting older, it's no use fighting it, my friends. No use fighting it. You just got to roll with the punches. But we are going to continue. We say 2 chapters a day. So we're going to move on to chapter 4. Thank you all for coming. Um, try my best with this book and the language in it. So bear with me, guys. Alrighty, let us continue. Even after all these years, I still can't quite wrap my head around the fact that I got me the same name as the fellow on this here coin. I got me the same name as the fellow on this here coin. Clara smiled. Ben Franklin stood on the other side of her telewindow at the Sunset Bank and Trust, holding a new $50 between his fingers, raising it so the late morning sunshine caught the silver, making it shine. Every time I march on in here and plop down my coins, he said, waving the pile Clara was busy counting. There he is, staring back. He's talking about the coin, right? Every time he puts the coin down, Benjamin Franklin is staring at him. That's the picture of Benjamin Franklin on the coin. If you want, I could flip them over. Nah, Ben replied with a grin. Makes me feel like I'm famous. And in some ways he was. For decades, Ben Franklin's family had raised pigs on their land south of town. an enormous man in both size and spirit. Ben also had a booming voice that could be heard a block away. His overalls, which strained to hold his girth, were often covered in pig manure. Oh, yeah. Creating a smell so potent that plenty of folks, when they understood he was coming their way, quickly headed in the opposite direction. Oh, but that's why is it that they're afraid to sleep? Well, I don't know why I am afraid to sleep. I'm not afraid to sleep, but it's just that when I have stuff to do, it's just like sleeping is not the option. And then I do and I do and I do and I do and I do, and then I crash. Because last night I was only going to sleep for about an hour and a half because I said I was going to maybe do red flag review at maybe 8:30. 8, oh God. Oh boy. I tell you, I'm not afraid to sleep, but I just feel like there's just so much to do. I don't know. Maybe I need an evaluation or something. Maybe because I don't know. I can't go on like this. But not Clara. For almost 10 years now, she had waited on him at the bank. He was there most every day. Whenever the Franklin family made a transaction, butchering a hog or selling eggs from the chickens they raised on the side, Ben brought whatever money they earned down to the bank the next morning, stood bright, cheerful, and fragrant in Clara's line, and made a deposit. While others wrinkled their noses, Clara enjoyed his company, odor and all. Today, only one day removed from the anniversary of Joe's death, that company was especially welcomed. Mm, mm. Sometimes I wonder what the old cuss would have thought of me, Ben said, still staring at the coin. Reckon we wouldn't get along. No doubt in my mind, Clara answered with a smile. As smart as a man as he was, I bet you would have taught him a thing or two. Signing the Declaration of Independence, sailing off to France, and discovering electricity. They don't say electricity, they say electricity. And discovering electricity. Why? Ain't none of that holds a candle to raising hogs. He declared before bustling into laughter at his own joke. That sounds like me always laughing at my own jokes. But if you don't laugh, if nobody else laughs, I will at my own foolishness. Even though she had heard this gag, or at least one like it dozens of times, Clara couldn't help but join in. It was at times like this that Clara felt grateful for her job. In the beginning, her reason for working at the bank had been to help the war effort. Most of Sunset's men had gone into the service, leaving behind jobs in desperate need of being filled. But it hadn't been long for her to fall in love with it. It hadn't taken long for her to fall in love with it. She soon knew everyone in town. People who were happy or sad, rich or poor, young or old. She knew about births and deaths, who was to be married, as well as couples who were in relationship troubles. But that familiarity cut both ways. When Joe had been killed, all of Sunset knew. To make matters worse, in the weeks and months after, her heart was aching, struggling with grief. Clara had to face her friends, neighbors, the whole town as they stood before her and offered their condolences. Everyone meant well, but it still brought back the agony of her loss again and again. The same was true for her mother's health and Tommy's rebelliousness, though no one ever came out and said anything. It was obvious that they knew all the same. Still, it wasn't as if she could quit to save herself the shame and scrutiny. Her family desperately needed the money. Her job provided. Besides, there was plenty to enjoy, particularly people like Ben Franklin. She had just said it she had just said her goodbyes to the pig farmer when Agnes Durant, one of her fellow tellers, approached and said, Eddie wants to see you in his office. Hey! Clara's stomach knotted. Unfortunately, she had bigger problems at the bank than the occasional smell of manure. Clara stood outside Eddie Fuller's office, waiting for a sign to enter. The bank president sat behind his enormous desk, talking on the telephone. Through the open door, she caught snippets of conversation that were occasionally punctuated by nervous Theodore had been the founder of the Sunset Bank and Trust and one of the most respected men in town. Guys, I don't know why I get a feeling that Clara is going to be with a man. She is finally going to say yes to somebody. I just feel like it's been a long time since Joe's been dead. And I think it's high time she finds somebody. But look who is talking. Anywho, AG's in the house, coming at the right time. How are you doing, my brother? Oh my God. I felt good to see you, AG, as always. As always. As always. As always. As always. Theo had run things both profitably and fairly, believing that business art agreements should be honorable for all parties. His son was put his son was but a pale shadow of the man. Theo had brought Eddie into the family business, hoping that with some experience he might come out of his shell, might lose some of his awkwardness that handicapped him. But no matter how much his father coaxed him along, no matter how many chances he was given, Eddie hadn't changed a bit. Eventually relegated to a corner desk, he had sat silently, like a piece of furniture, waiting for another opportunity. Then, 2 months ago, Theo had unexpectedly died. Oops. A few days after his father's casket had been lowered into the ground, Eddie had installed himself as the bank's president. Clara had watched him stand silently in the middle of the room, a box in his hand, looking completely lost. Whatever hopes people had that Eddie would seize his father's mantle were quickly dashed. Long-standing customers grumbled about Eddie's incompetence, desperately trying to right his wrong, undoubtedly feeling his authority threatened. He had fired Roy Washington, hmm, an employee of nearly 20 years. Through it all, he flashed his trademark weak smile. Glancing up at her, Eddie cupped his hands over his receiver and motioned for Clara to enter. She went inside and sat down as he resumed talking. It looked like I've been talking to you, Fred, Eddie began, pausing to glance at Clara. Things are changing around here. You can either get on board this speeding train now, while there is still time, or you can watch from the depot as we rocket down the tracks behind you. Hey guys, how's everybody doing? Good to see you all. Clara struggled to keep from frowning. Eddie's bragging sounded ridiculous to her ears. She wondered whether anyone was even on the other end of the phone. It would be just like Eddie to make another misguided attempt at impressing her. For years, ever since she had joined the bank, Clara had understood that Eddie fancied her. It had begun with long, lingering looks as she stood behind her teller window. These had been easy enough to ignore, but soon after, he had become bolder, telling her jokes without a sliver of humor, inappropriately complimenting her on her clothes, her hair, noticing even when she changed her shade of lipstick. Though Clara certainly never encouraged his advances, she was wary of turning him away too brusquely for fear of losing a desperately needed job. One day, a couple of years back, Theo had caught Eddie dithering on as Clara stood silently beside him and called his son into his office. Eddie must have gotten a stern talking to by his father, 'cause he hadn't said a word to her in months, though he had still spent most of his days staring at her from his desk. That's gotta be creepy. Imagine somebody in the bank just staring at you. Somebody at your job keeps staring at you like, what in the world? Listen here, Eddie began. Eddie continued. Now that I'm in charge, if there's something you don't want or something you want, I'm your man. He's taking over now that his dad is dead. For some people, they can't shine in the presence of somebody they fear. So that person has to be removed for them to shine. This is his situation. Looking at Eddie, Clara wondered what any woman would possibly find attractive about him. He was short and pudgy, the rolls of his neck mushroomed up over the top of his stifling starched shirt. His eyes were wide and always wet. His sparse hair was combed across his forehead, making his oncoming baldness all the more obvious. His chin was weak, almost non-existent. Can you see Eddie by the description, guys? Just by the description. Hold on, the guys. Hold on. Give me 2 seconds. Okay, not the right one. All right, let's get back to this. I was expecting, I was expecting someone to call me, and I wasn't sure. All right, let's get back to it. Where were we? Looking at Eddie, Clara wondered what any woman would possibly see attractive about him. He was short and pudgy, the rolls of his neck mushroomed up over the top of his stiffly charged, stiffly starched shirt. His eyes were wide and always wet. His sparse hair was combed across his head, making his oncoming baldness all the more obvious. His chin was weak, almost non-existent, as if it had fallen off by accident. Worst of all, his lips were always dry and cracked, an ugly feature made worse when his tongue, fat and pink, darted out to wet them. Oh my gosh, that sounds like a chameleon. Oh my God. His personality was equally unappealing. Though he was around Clara's age, he seemed younger, more innocent, sheltered. Simply put, he didn't know how to interact with others. He laughed loudly at his own jokes, interrupted conversations, and forgot names, dates, important figures. Unlike his father, whose willingness to listen made him a pillar of Sunset's business community, Eddie was distracted, often staring blankly at the person across from him, as if he hadn't been able to pay attention. That sounds great. Together, we'll both make loads of money, Eddie boasted before wrapping up his conversation. With the phone back in its cradle, Clara sat quietly and expectantly, but to her surprise, Eddie didn't say a word. While she hated the sound of his high nasal voice, she found the deepening silence to be equally uncomfortable. With a show of fanfare, Eddie opened a silver box on the corner of his desk and took out a cigar. He cut the end, put it in his mouth, snapped his lighter to life, lit it, and inhaled a deep drag. Almost instantly he coughed, a harsh bark that shattered whatever illusion he was trying to create. Embarrassed for him, Clara offered a weak smile. Undeterred, Eddie came around to the front of the desk. He sat on a corner and his pants, a tighter fit than they should have been, hiked up awkwardly at the crotch. Disgusted, Clara looked away. You don't like me much, do you? Momentarily taken off guard, Clara wasn't sure how to answer. She knew that the truth probably wouldn't do her any good. Finally, she settled on, I haven't always enjoyed the attention you have given me. Eddie nodded as if he understood. For a while, I blamed myself for the misunderstanding between us. He, he explained solemnly. But the more time passed, the more I realized that it was actually my father's fault. Snaring, he added, that old blowhard kept us apart. What? He was a good man, Clara stammered. No, he wasn't, Eddie disagreed, pausing to give his dry lips a long lick. Hey, oh my God. Nothing I ever did was good enough for him. Every suggestion I made to strengthen this bank was rejected. Whenever I wanted to speak with someone about making us all richer, he told me to be quiet. It was always do as I say, he explained sarcastically. Well, now he's gone and I'm in charge. From here on out, things are gonna be different. If Clara hadn't been in such dire financial straits, if her family's survival hadn't hinged on her job, she would have wondered if the smart move wasn't to follow Roy Washington out the door. Eddie was delusional. Theo had built the Sunset Bank and Trust into something special. Now his incompetent son was going to knock it all to the ground. In the days, months, and years to come, it would surely ruin him, as well as the lives of many others in Sunset. But no matter how badly Clara wanted to tell him how wrong he was, she couldn't bring herself to doing it. He was wrong to interfere, Eddie reasoned. Unsure of what he was talking about, Clara asked, with what? Us, he answered, pointing at her with his index finger, himself with his thumb, and wriggling his hand back and forth. Oh, okay, so he's got an eye on Clara. Clara could only stare as the sickening feeling in her stomach grew stronger. If you'd have stayed out of it, you would have fallen for me by now, like Juliet for Romeo. Eddie continued, punctuating his claims with a strange snort of laughter. If he hadn't banished me to that damn corner desk, I'd bet every damn cent this bank has that you'd feel the same for me as I do for you. I, I, I don't, she muttered, her head swimming. I love you, he proclaimed. Hearing it so bluntly horrified her. Guys, I don't know how well I'm doing with this reading this morning. God knows. Because this is too much. Eddie, I can't. I can't. He licked his lips, then asked, do you want to be happy? Truly happy? Still stunned, Clara nodded. Her thoughts raced as she tried to come up with a way to reject Eddie without offending him. Of of course I do, but guys, for those of us who have been in the market, for those of us who have been in the market for somebody, not that I'm on the market, I'm in the market but not on the market, but but at some point in our lives, we have all been in the market trying to find a suitable partner, and sometimes the people who come forth who are bold enough to come forth and say how they are feeling about you are really not the people you are interested in, and the ones you have eyes on are really not the ones who have eyes on you. That can be that can be frustrating at times. You know what I mean? But anyway, Maribel is in the house. Come with me, amor. Happy Wednesday to you. Happy Wednesday. How are you doing? So good to see you, my love. Let us continue. Eddie went behind his desk. Piles of paper were spread across his blotter. He shuffled them until he found the one he wanted. It says here that you and your late husband, he read, pausing to give Clara another awkward smile, borrowed the money for your house back in 37. That sounds about right. Clara remembered those days well. She and Joe had been married the summer before and wanted a place of their own. Unfortunately, money was hard to come by. Her mother, having long struggled to make ends meet after her husband's death, had nothing to spare. Joe's parents were even worse off. Instead, they're taking out a loan from Theophila to build a roof over their heads. By the time the house was finished, they owed the bank a pretty penny. But all their plans for repaying what they had borrowed had ended with Joe's death. Now, though money was tighter than ever, Clara had diligently kept up the payments, refusing to default, which made Eddie's words all the more mysterious. From the look of these numbers, he said, peering at her over the top of the paper, it seems you still owe plenty. I do, but I've always paid on time, she replied. What if I told you that I could make this debt of yours disappear? What kind of quid pro quo going on here? He said, letting go of the paper, which fell back onto the pile on his desk. So Clara can't love Eddie for Eddie because Eddie is a swamp. But but Eddie believes that if he can forgive Clara's debt, then he might stand a chance. Oh dear God. You see how poverty is, guys? Poverty is that I say all the time. I don't know why people um wouldn't want to get out of poverty because it puts you in such a precarious situation, especially when people know your needs and try to exploit you because of your needs. It is sickening. Here he is trying to exploit this woman because he's now the manager of the bank and he knows the woman owes the money and is desperate for money. He thinks he's going to exploit that so he could get her to date him. I hope Clara never does. But let us continue. Let us continue. Eddie leaned forward onto his elbows, licked his lips, flashed a goofy smile, and then said, marry me. Clara recoiled, flinching as if someone was about to strike her. It embarrassed her to have reacted that way, but she couldn't help herself. She waited for Eddie to laugh, to confess that he was joking with her, but he just stared expectantly, as if waiting for an answer. His delusion fighting, his delusion frightened her. Eddie, you've got this wrong. As Mrs. Edward Fuller, you'd fully and Mrs. Edward Fuller. He already calling her by his name. He's so foolish. And he says, as Mrs. Edward Fuller, you'd want for nothing, he interrupted. Everyone in town would smile as you walk by, acknowledging you as the beautiful, important woman you would be. After the wedding, you, your son, even your mother would all move into my house. Eddie's eyes were aglow with excitement for the fantasy he had woven out of his imagination. Eddie is something else. It would be perfect, he proclaimed. He proclaimed. Clara took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. Incredibly, there was a teeny tiny part of her that found Eddie's offer alluring. If she became his wife, her financial troubles would be over. Poring over his ledgers, trying to find the money to pay for clothes, groceries, the electric bill, or her mother's trips to the doctor would be a thing of the past. It wasn't that she wanted to be rich, just not so poor. Oh my God, that's the plight of a lot of women. A lot of people, really, not just women. You don't want to be stinking rich. You just don't want to be dirt poor, where you have to bang a barrel to get enough flour to make one dumpling or something like that. You know, let's continue. But Clara knew that marriage was about farther But Clara knew that marriage was about far more than money. She and Joe had never been well off, scrimping and scrumping and saving for a few luxuries, a washing machine and a new icebox. But the love they shared more than made up for whatever was lacking in their bank account. Every passing year brought them new riches. The house was one, the pickup truck was another, and the day Tommy was born, Clara felt like the wealthiest woman alive. It was love, not dollar bills, that paid for their life together. To marry Eddie just for his money would have been an insult to Joe's memory, and that she could not do. Eddie, I can't marry you, she declared. For an instant, the banker's smile faltered, but he quickly recovered, bringing it back to its usual intensity. You say that now, he replied, pausing to lick his lips. Him and that licking of the lips. But given enough time, I'm sure you'd come to realize that. No, I wouldn't, Clara said, daring to cut him off. I can't marry someone I'm not in love with. I just can't. Eddie's expression reflected his desperation. All I want is a chance to. I'm never going to be in love with you. As soon as the words left Clara's mouth, she regretted them. Eddie's reaction was immediate. This time, when his smile disappeared, it stayed gone. His eyes narrowed, his cheeks flushed a deep red, and his lower lip trembled. Clara knew that she had both angered and embarrassed him. You are turning me down? You are rejecting me? Eddie snapped, his voice shrill enough to make Clara worry that other people in the bank could hear. I'm sorry, Eddie, but if you don't care about what I can give you, he said, spitting foam on his dry lips, maybe you'll give a damn about what I can take away. Furiously, Eddie snatched back up the paper detailing Clara's house loan, crumpling one of the corners in his clenched fist. What if instead of making this disappear, he spat, I took your home and everything in it? Oh dear God. Clara was too stunned to answer. Nothing could have prepared her for this side of Eddie Fuller. She had never seen him this angry. She wondered if it had been she wondered if it had been there all this time, lurking just beneath the surface, waiting years to be let out. His father's death had apparently unlocked the door. But but I told you, she finally said, I've always paid on time. So what? He answered with a sneer. Do you think I can't alter the ledgers to make it look as though you have fallen behind? And that that's the only way my father's generosity could be taken. Just like that, he explained with a snap of his fingers, you'd be out on the street. You'd do that if I didn't agree to marry you? Clara nearly shouted, her voice laced with panic, her heart now racing. But then, bizarrely and faster than flipping a light switch, Eddie's anger vanished and his familiar dopey smile returned. Those people are scary. They just flip a smile and get back to being angry and then flip another smile without provocation. Hmm. Now, he soothed, don't go getting all worked up. I wasn't saying that I was going to do that, only that I could. Clara reeled. Her troubles were already bad enough without this. Eddie was blackmailing her, plain and simple. If she didn't give him what he wanted, if she didn't agree to become his wife, he would take away everything. Still smiling, Eddie came back around the desk and knelt down on the floor in front of her. What a piece of inappropriateness. Clara worried that he was going to formally propose, like something out of a trashy romance novel, but he just took her hand and stared at her. When he licked his lips, it made her want to retch. What? Never mind all that loan business, Eddie told her, acting as if he wasn't the one who had brought it up, using it against her like a weapon. All right, she muttered. What we need is a new start, the banker continued, giving her hand an insistent squeeze. I'm sure that the next time I come over to talk with. Eddie's ramblings were interrupted by the ringing of the phone. After he had answered, settled back into his chair, and propping his foot up on the desk, Clara took it as her cue to leave. If Eddie tried to stop her, she didn't notice. All the way back to her telewindow, her head swam. How am I ever going to get out of this mess? She thought. What a piece of audacity, guys. What a piece of audacity. So Eddie is trying to blackmail her. He is trying to get her to marry him. He hadn't even courted her. How the hell you go? He even courted her. For the years she had been working at the bank, he had been sitting there staring at her, not ever saying anything, even close to him trying to woo her, except complimenting her a few times. And then after his father talked to him about it, how inappropriate it was, he just stared at her. But now he just wants to jump into marrying her. And because he now has all this money, he's going to tell her if she don't marry him, he's going to falsify her loan agreement and then have her put out on the street, make her homeless. And then he could take her job as well. Oh my God. When people have power over you, the nasty people will use it against you. The good people will use it to build you. And this is something that happens in workplaces all around the world every single day, where people try to use their power and their authority to subdue others. And this is so wrong. But we're going to read again. We're going to continue reading to find out whatever happened between Clara and Eddie. Thank you all so much for coming in this morning. It was my absolute pleasure reading these two chapters, even though this morning was a bunker. I must admit. It was. It was. But anyway, we got through it, bumper and all. Bunker and all. So we will be back here tomorrow when we will read another two chapters of twice in a life. What's wrong with me this morning? Am I getting a stroke or something? Twice in a Lifetime by Dorothy Garlock. Join me again tomorrow morning, my friends, when we do this all over again. Yes, ma'am. Not just late, but very late. Very, very late. Because I am hopping off. Yeah. I have to go finish editing my videos for my healthcare videos. I gotta go finish editing them right now. All right, guys. So, God, we will talk on the other side of town. All right, guys. So we will be back here tomorrow morning. Have yourselves a fabulous day. Until next time, this is Trev from Trevesan, where your journey matters